Hello to everyone in my ongoing series on what does it mean to have a talking cure. In the last video, we described some new directions in some of the research that I'm conducting along what I call my two-track theory. And I think in this video, I'd like to provide a little more insight on what can be done to help people really change on emotional, medical, psychiatric, mental health, and also for my fellow Christians on the spiritual level as well. I had a professor once who said that we tend to see things in bits and pieces. And I think that's probably true in a lot of ways. I think it's so true. I was just got off the phone talking to a patient whose 78-year-old dad is going through a lot of prostate problems, a lot of complexities with that, and she is the likely logical candidate to be the good liaison for her folks, parent or dad in particular, and of course with the medical community. The medical and scientific community can tend to be quite complicated, especially since we use big words, and sometimes those words need to be translated in so many ways. And so I see my role in the Talking Cure as a translator in so many ways. And so it's not unusual to understand that more is going on for every human being, boy and girl, than maybe that we're used to seeing maybe today now more than ever. Just for you newcomers, I want you to know that my background is very complex. I trained at the doctoral, postdoctoral levels in Christianity, philosophical theology, and big words like epistemology, all those things like that, especially in the philosophical side of things. And also my calling, what I believe I was called, I believe my career chose me, and I didn't choose my career so much. But I pursued the psychiatric sciences at the highest levels, my PhD and postdoctoral work at School of Medicine, at departments of neuropsychiatry, departments of clinical psychology, kind of a whole smorgasbord of specialties. And my story is that ever since I was a young person, I was trying to find answers to life's problems. I was attempting to try to make sense of this thing we call life. How does it work? How does my family situation work? And how does it work for you? I was listening to a YouTube video by a Nobel Prize winner in medicine in the 20th century, and he talks about, as a retired doctor now in New York, that he talks about that he underwent a time of analysis because it helped him try to understand things, what made his life tick, and how to put pieces together about future career goals. And unlike me, this particular doctor did not pursue full psychoanalytic training like I did. And I always find it interesting when I'm talking to boards of examiners, people who give you licenses and make you jump through all these different hoops. When one particular state board of examiners said, "So you're an analyst?" I go, "Yes." He said, "You took some workshops here and there?" I go, "No, I actually did the full 4 years of psychoanalytic training." He goes, "You're kidding. You didn't just do workshops or take a class here or take a class there?" And I said, no, I was pretty much of a glutton for punishment. So I did the whole 4 extensive years. New York, Boston, London, and boom, and here I am today. I'm also a Christian. I hope that doesn't turn off the audience, but this is who I am. I make no bones about that. I have no secrets as far as my Christianity is concerned. I believe that the only reason that you should be a Christian if you're not, the only reason I became a Christian is because I believe it's all true. I believe it's all true. And sometime, if you'd like to get into a dialogue about it, why I think it's true, I would be glad to have that conversation with you. and especially in the light of what I would call the late modern era, that there are different kinds of things going on in terms of shifting in paradigms, shifting in scientific revolutions. Think of the work of Thomas Kuhn, who talked about the philosophy of science, how there's shifts going on all over the planet, and especially in our late modern period, there's a shift away from, a pushing away from positivism, reductionism. Gosh, I hope I don't get too technical here on the video, but I'll do my best not to. But reductionism, positivism, that has been pretty much rampant for quite some time. The reductionism would be, positivism would be, I have a chemical imbalance, so I need a medication, or I have a reason to have cancer because it's genetically been passed down to me. And folks, we now know that that's not the case. We know that in terms of twin studies and fraternal twins and identical twins and so on and so forth. That the studies are really, the studies in genetics are a whole different subject. And I do plan to do a video on how regulation, how my SOAR, Seeing Others Through the Art of Regulation, my acronym, actually fits into genetic studies. As I mentioned in the previous video, I spent pretty much the Christmas break a year ago going through 300-400 pages of genetics so I can understand what's going on in genetics and how can the Talking Cure offer something new and something fresh for that discussion. So folks, I say that all just as a prelude, or to use another big word, a prolegomena, so you can understand who I am and how what gives me the right to want to kind of speak to you about things that are very complicated, things about life. Particularly, I trained in the neurosciences and in clinical psychoanalysis. And what I tell folks, the clinical psychoanalysis is not the Freud that your grandmother thought about. It's not the Freud that you're maybe reading about in a textbook if you're taking graduate classes or in undergraduate classes. And that as a result, the historical investigations that I'm doing are now showing new types of integration that's necessary. My goal is to integrate, is to provide a unified theory, a unified field theory. It's not happening in Christian counseling areas. I was telling some folks the other day that Christian counseling, are you a Christian counselor? Are you a biblical counselor? It's like asking, what denomination are you? Are you a Baptist, Methodist, Presbyterian? There's so many different views and so many different ideas about what is biblical counseling. I've devoted some actual videos to that, and I would encourage you to go back and look at those particular videos. And at the same time, that the marriage of neuroscience and the marriage of analysis has not been done. It has not been tried out in our generation. And so as a result, that is what I believe my call to fame is, or my call to get your attention, is to take the best of these neurosciences, the brain sciences, and I would include in that the medical sciences, I would include in that you name it, what typically your internist does, what your cardiologist would do, what your typically neurologist would do, or your neuropsychologist would do, and to take that and to build on that structure another foundation that I would call a relational foundation. So rather than think of it as a top-down approach, I think what I call relationality is more of an undergirding approach that's foundational, and that it's a bottom-up approach. But to take the best of medical science, of the brain sciences, the nervous system, and regulating theory, my Seeing Others Through the Art of Regulation, SOAR, that acronym you've heard before, and then of course to take the best of what I would call Christian thinking, the Christian worldview. I was fortunate enough to be very much influenced by some amazing mentors of mine in the past. Some of the mentors that come to mind, people like Francis Schaeffer, people like John Work Montgomery, people like Larry Crabb, and many more, some of the leaders in the fields of the day. And I was always very much impressed that there's not a particular unified field theory, if I could call it that brings the best of these disciplines and the sciences and how they can fit in with a very comprehensive particular Christian worldview. In many posts and many other places, whether it's Facebook or actually YouTube videos, I'm pushing back against what I'm seeing as positivism or a reductionism in Christian thinking. And I think that that's a mistake. In the last video, I talked about since the 1930s in the United States, that moralism, 12-step programs, reductionistic thinking, positivism that came in from Europe, Oxford, Cambridge, that's influenced the planet, and that still is very pervasive in so many ways, especially in Christian thinking. And so I believe that the best paradigm for real change, if we're talking as one Christian to another, is to utilize that three-legged stool. And that three-legged stool is that we need to become experts in what the special revelation teaches, the 66 books of the Hebrew Bible and the Christian Bible. I prefer the word Hebrew Bible versus the Old Testament. But to know the languages, to know that, those scriptures, that material at the highest levels. And I think that a study in Greek and Hebrew is a good place to start. But there's no guarantee that if you learn Greek and Hebrew like I did, that you're going to be able to read carefully and you're going to be able to read sufficiently about the kind of model that I'm seeing, that I'm trying to create, the talking cure for folks. But I believe it's a good place to start. So when someone said to me, I want to challenge one of the top New Testament scholars on the planet, and this guy had just finished seminary, he just had a couple of years of Greek and Hebrew, and I said to him, well, why don't you wait 10 years and do a lot of studying, a lot of reading, especially in the literature and the scriptures too, and then after 10 years, come back to me and let's talk. And let's talk about what you learned and what you thought you knew and now that you don't know. And so this young seminarian was very taken back by my challenge to him. It's like a new set of parents who say they want to write a book about parenting, and I would tend to tell them, wait in 20 years, come back, call me back in 20 years, and let's talk about your book or what you want to write about. So folks, you see, I think that there's so much superficiality, so much limited kinds of thinking, because I realize not everybody has the ability, the experience, the opportunities to actually train. But I believe that today, and it's a calling that I believe I have from the triune God, that the best treatment today, whether it's medical, whether it's psychiatric, mental health, relational, that it has to be rooted in a two-track theory. And from previous videos, you'll know what I'm talking about. And if you haven't seen those, I would refer you back to those. The two-track theory would be to take the best of science and the best of Christian thinking and put them together and create the talking cure. And that's what I'm trying to do in these days of my life and in the days in the future, as these upcoming books that are coming up. That'll be a little more technical, a little more general. A number of those that hopefully will help to meet the needs that you have. So what's happened? What's going on? Let me suggest that from about 1861 till about 1980, there was a huge time in the medical sciences and the thought structures of today. Nothing new had really happened. There weren't any major breakthroughs. There weren't any major revolutions that were taking place. For example, one in particular would have been dream theory. Dream theory today, and don't be too fearful of the dream theory. The dream theory taught that dreams come out of body states. They come from the brain stem. If you think of the brain stem at the bottom of my palm, they're coming up from the bottom up, and that they're just causing all of this neurological, neurochemical reactions, but they had really no merit. There was no basis for dreams, and this is how REM sleep, rapid eye movement, 5 stages of sleep, and so on and so forth. It kind of reminds me of like the two brain centers for language that were named after the scientists Broca, B-R-O-C-A, and Wernicke, W-E-R-N-I-C-K-E, two major neurologists over 100 years ago who found the two brain centers were speech, my ability to understand speech and my ability to give it back to you, to comprehend it as well as to speak it, that these were found in the left brain and the frontal lobes on the top side, and that these different areas there were turned on. And so after two, thereabouts, the smartest kid, as a Harvard study recently has shown, that the smartest kids on the planet can maybe speak about 70 words at age 2, and so on and so forth. So the theory was this, and I want to compare it to kind of dream studies. The theory is this, that anything that happened prior to 2 years old, before these language centers turned on, that were discovered by Broca and Wernicke, that these centers were not turned on, so the opposite would be true. So there's no language going on in a child for the first year and a half, 2 years. Of course, if you think about this, that is really ludicrous. If you're around a child who's 6 months old, 5 months old, 4 months old, a year and a half old, that maybe the child can't speak. Maybe there's the goo goo, gaga, mommy, dada, but there's so much more going on in terms of brain states and what's happening in the mind. And in a previous video, I mentioned how today modern psychiatry has lost its soul, and that the modern church has lost its mind. And I want you to think about that. So the reality is that there's more and more going on in terms of a nervous system than we ever thought possible. And that the first year is just fully rampant with all kinds of things, even language that maybe is not verbalized, but it's being conceptualized, it's being formulated, and that would be within the first year of life. That there's a pushing back of current studies about language and so on and so forth. What can we remember at the age of 2 versus 3? I was taught after 3 years old, our memories, we can't remember memories at 2 years old, and so on and so forth. And actually that's being reversed now in places like New York, where some of my former professors have actually discovered that patients can remember things that were pre-verbal, that we can remember these things, and that there's some importance to that memory, or being able to retrieve these types of things. So what's happening now in dream studies is that we now know that dreams are not coming from the brainstem, but they're coming more from the upper part, in the middle of the hand, or the brain. If you think of my hand representing the brain, and in the middle of the brain is where we have emotions. This is the limbic system. Here's some big words, gang. Limbic system, the locus ceruleus. Right below, there's the amygdala on both sides, right and left. This is our fight, flight, freeze, faint types of the 4F responses of the human nervous system. So dreams now, we know, it's refuted the old theory that dreams are coming from the lower systems, but no, the dreams are not coming up from the higher systems. And then as a result, this means that in dreams, when you dream 7 to 9 times a night, like I do, and the issue is, do we remember those dreams? We may not remember those dreams, but the issue is that the brain, the nervous system, is remembering those dreams. So what I do is I often teach patients, and hear me out. I may say to a patient, by the word, I like the word patient better than a client. Some counselors, you mental health folks, will prefer the word client. To me, the word client is a little too anemic. If I'm in real estate, I have a client. If I'm selling insurance, I have a client. But the work that I'm talking about truly is a medical neurobiological, a meta-theological neurobiological framework. So the word patient seems to fit better until I can find a better word for it. So the reality is I tell folks, look, have you talked to your heart today? And patients just generally get like, no. Have you talked to your kidneys today? No. Have you talked to your liver? Well, absolutely not, doc. Where are you going with this? Well, you see, the brain is an organ, just like these other different systems. And since the brain is an organ, it's the only system, it's the only organ that can actually talk back to us. It's the only system that actually can communicate, unlike these other organs. And you see, folks, the modern world of neurology, neuropsychology, psychiatry, the modern world has made a huge mistake, and that we believe that talking to the brain is like talking to an object, because the brain is an object, the heart is an object, and all these different systems are objects. But the reality is that the brain also has a mind, and the mind is that subjective state. Real, it's hard to quantify. How can you do a longitudinal study? How can I do empirical research on the mind, on the self, on these subjective feelings that are just as real? And that if you limit science to what you can only measure, what you can only do empirical, longitudinal, then you have a limited view of science. So I believe that when I'm sitting down talking with someone, that immediately, call it push, pull, call it what you want, call it transference. We can use a lot of different common terms that come out of psychiatry. We can use words that are coming out of theological thinking, but that there's an interaction, there's a transactional interaction taking place as soon as someone sits down with me. And that by simply looking at the person as an object, much like the kidneys or liver, we're going to fail to miss. We're really going to fail, and we're going to miss what's really going on inside of people. And that's where the talking cure comes handy to help people. Remember this phrase: when two people learn how to fire together, they can rewire together and survive together. When two people fire together, they can rewire and they can survive together. You see, the rewiring is this neurobiology approach. And again, from 1860, let me go back to some history. From about 1860 till about 1980, nothing really unique was happening in terms of neurology and in the science and the sciences. And as a result, out of that period, medications developed. We began to see the Prozacs of the world emerging. We began to see the chemical imbalance theories emerging. We began to see analysis in my way, in a relational way, began to be put on the back burner. A clinical analyst like myself was required to training after doctoral training, then you've done your residency, and then you go back to school and you spend 4+ more years, and you then become an analyst like I did. And that requirement was necessary to become the chair, the head of a department of neuropsychiatry, whether it's at Stanford, whether it's in the Northeast or in the South, places like Duke, Chapel Hill, South Carolina. That was required for you to become an analyst, that you had to have this training before you would be eligible for this position. Well, see, folks, nothing new was happening up until 1980. So we had a swath period that no real breakthroughs, no real revolutions were happening. And then since the 1980s and then today, we've seen a plethora. We've seen just an explosion. Truly, it's a revolution going on in terms of what we now know about the nervous system and how we can see in real time through neuroimaging. We can see in real time what's taking place, what system is getting turned on, what system is getting turned off. And the pushback is, and this is a concern I have, the pushback is that we don't want to reduce all these new scientific findings, these neurological findings, to a new kind of reductionism. And this is where the debate takes place, and I have a lot to say about that. I may not get into that today. But in terms of the tools for the journey, as I mentioned before in Exodus 12, where God told the people of God, the Israelites, when they left Egypt, take these spoils with you for the journey. And I believe that's what my calling is, to take the best of these spoils, the scientific, medical sciences, and to begin to help people rewire together and learn how to do that through a talking cure. So it was in the 1860s that doctors were trained like I am. They were trained to see patients. They were trained to do more. the two schools of thought, the German school and then the French school, and that a lot of my predecessors left Germany, physicians, neurologists left Germany to go and train in Paris. There was a lot of stuff going on, a lot of wonderful breakthroughs, and I find it interesting that the two schools of thought I've reduced to some simple language. So the German school was, okay, let's do a medical model and let's fix what's wrong. And then the French, as the French were always very, very clever about these sorts of things. In Paris, they were doing, okay, let's see if we can treat the symptoms. Let's teach people, patients, how to do the right thing. Let's do what's right. Fix what's wrong, let's do what's right. So out of this 20-year, 30-year period, happening about 1860, 61, as I'm revisiting these papers, able to read them, and just it's an exciting time for me as I'm working on new research for new books so I can impact the world one person at a time. And I read about that, and I saw for about a 20-year period, then the doctors like me came to the conclusion, wait a minute, there's more to do, and that what we're doing, just trying to fix things, treat symptoms, and just do the medicalizing today. If your kidneys are malfunctioning, go see the nephrologist. If you're having heart problems, then go see the cardiologist, or go see, like my patient's father did this morning, and go see the urologist. Folks, that's all necessary. That's all is good. But again, as I mentioned before, these are necessary things to do, but they're not sufficient to produce the talking cure in my life and in your life. And so I believe that the something more that can be done has to take place in a relational model. A lot of folks are kicking the word around. What is relationship? What does it mean? And I'm afraid the word relationship, like community, that these now become the new buzzwords. And that these new buzzwords, like the denominations, have a lot of different interpretations. One might talk about it's better to be together. Others are talking about community and let's have small groups. Let's do that. For some it means let's have a 12-step group. Let's do something in terms of recovery. We have the boundaries issues. See, the problem is that you're not managing your boundaries. And as I was telling somebody who's very dear to me just the other day, that in my training as a doctor for all of my adult life, the word boundary has not been given much priority. It's not given much credibility today. So is there a place for boundaries? Sure, absolutely. There's a place for boundaries. So if I'm an alcoholic and I tell my partner, hey, go get me a six-pack, go drive down to the local beverage place and grab me some drinks, then my partner should say, no, I'm not going to do that. Or if I'm sick and the phone rings and my partner gets the phone and says, hey, where's Arch? Well, you know, he came down with the flu, he came down with a fever, and so he's not able to come today. We would call that codependency, that my partner is being codependent. She's enabling me to not experience the consequences of my actions and my bad behavior. You see, folks, what's happened in terms of not only medically and the breakthroughs or the lack of them from the 1860s till 1980, but I'm seeing the same kind of a vacuum, the missing frameworks that can take people and say, I can rewire you, I can regulate you, I can create a cure in your life. Why does Isaiah 53 say, by his stripes we're healed? What does that mean? Is there a certain kind of healing? Why do my charismatic friends say, we know how to do that? My idea of healing is that when the washing machine breaks down, I lay hands on it, remember this? I lay hands on it and pray, God, fix this thing. Or when my car is breaking down, I lay hands on it and say, please fix the brakes, fix the transmission, do whatever you got to do, God. And then when I'm done, after I finish praying, then I call the mechanic. You see, folks, we can actually, as I tease, we can actually go further with each other. We can live in the new way of the Spirit and not in the old way of the letter, of the flesh. So in my recent conversation with my friend who has a PhD in the natural sciences, he's very theologically sophisticated. He just did a lot of study in the Reformation. And as we were talking about on the phone, and he was giving me some very elaborate interpretations of Scripture and science because he's capable, he's competent in both fields. And he began to talk about what sounded like he was formulating a model, a theory, a clinical theory about how to help people. And I said, I'll make up a name. Dave, let me ask you a question. He said, sure. How would you apply that to a person who's going through major depression? He goes, well, I would tell her or him to get closer to God. Okay. And then after that, what would you do? Well, I would maybe give them some homework how to do that. Well, what would you do the same thing for somebody who has anxiety problems, panic disorder? Would you say that to somebody who has a medical problem? And he said, well, medical problems are different. And I said, well, we'll talk about that because I see them together. They're neurobiological. So I see that they're together, but what would you say to these folks, these hurting people, these people who are going through a lot? Well, Isaiah 53, by his stripes we're healed. What does that mean? What does that mean? He said, well, I would tell them to spend more time with the Bible and spend more time with God, get into their small group, their Christian community. And then I said, after all that, let's say they do that. They cooperate, they participate in all that, then what? And he said, you mean if they still have the problem? I said, absolutely. He said, then I wouldn't know where to go with them. I would run out of things. I would say that they're being stubborn, they're being rebellious, they're being all of the above. And I said, well, see what you're saying, Dave, is that you've reached the limits of your model. The limits, there's the ceiling of your system. And what if we were thinking about that there's something more that we can do? Maybe if there's a certain kind of way that we can learn to talk to each other, the talking cure. If we can learn how to really speak to each other, death and life are in the power of the tongue. If we learned the skill set of what regulation is all about. Don't let any unwholesome words come out of your mouth, Ephesians 4. If we can learn this different kinds of models, then what would that mean? If I'm talking to someone who unfortunately has been diagnosed as paranoid schizophrenic, what do you do? What do you do with that? When I say to him, hi Jeff, oh doc, that makes me nervous. Or when we talk about medication, how's your medication going, Jeff? Oh, do you want to take my medication away, or you want to add more? Are you trying to hurt me? And my doctor friend said, I'm missing your point. My point is that what we're doing is that we're engaging each other at the level of the mind. We're engaging each other at the objects of heart, soul, mind. We're dealing with each other on brain levels, on body levels, somatic levels, but we're also engaging each other as minds, the subject and not just objects. So when I introduce myself to another person in terms of my thoughts, my feelings, my wishes, my expectations, that can potentially dysregulate someone. Imagine if you're married to a narcissist. Imagine if you have a narcissist in your family. What I find interesting is that the narcissists have a hard time allowing me to have a connection with them because they're blocked. They feel like I'm interfering with something, that another mind is coming into my mind. It's kind of like the IT person, as we've talked about, sharing my computer with someone who's off-site. What does that do? It's a little eerie, isn't it? Those of you who've done this. It's a real unusual experience to have someone actually in your computer moving things around and things like that. You see, folks, that's the analogy. And this is very true for the narcissist who does not want another mind to interfere with his mind or her mind. Or somebody who's been diagnosed as a borderline personality. These are very severe diagnoses, narcissism and borderline. These are folks that are characteristic. They're human beings. I don't think of them as a label. I don't think of them as symptoms. I think of them as a human being that has a mind like I do, and that whatever's happened in life, developmentally, traumatically, whatever it is, and that in our work together we'll find it together. But whatever's getting in the way of that person regulating and maturing at the highest levels, to have a mind that, what does St. Paul mean? Let this mind be within you that was also in Christ Jesus. Wow, folks, that's mind-boggling to think of the possibilities of that. But in other words, when two minds come together, there's maybe not the rewiring. Or when a friend walked up to me at Barnes & Noble and I had just finished my full training in psychiatry and analysis and in psychology. And he sat down, he said, "Hey, can I join you?" He said, "Sure." He ordered some coffee, we both had some coffee together, and then he started to school me, literally, in all that was going on in psychology in the last 25 years. So I listened very patiently. I became annoyed, and I said to him, you know, John, I think I know a lot about this too. Why don't we have a dialogue versus a monologue? And John looked at me, folks, and he said, wow. He said, "You're right. Why am I doing this? Why am I trying to force my thought patterns on you?" See, folks, this happens all the time, whether it's a parent-teenager relationship, whether it's a husband-wife relationship, whether it's parent-children, friends, colleagues. You see, I think over 85% of the problems that people are experiencing in companies and organizations and Fortune 500 companies, these are problems that are related to relationship. Why are churches splitting today? In my area, there's a ton of splitting going on in terms of churches. Everybody wants to have a church pretty much today. Is there anything wrong with it? I would always challenge the leaders to reflect, to think about it. And one of my acronyms, I got to study in France and Germany, is a BIER, the German word for beer. I think we need balance in our nervous system. The B, we need insight into our nervous system. We need to learn how to integrate it. We need empathy. We need a larger understanding, like a doctor in a stethoscope. When she is listening to her patient's symptoms, she knows how to use that stethoscope very carefully. And why is it that the word empathy was not introduced into the English language until about the 18th century? Look it up in Oxford's Dictionary of English. The word empathy means a very wide scope, kind of like a stethoscope, what we can do to really listen to each other. And then, of course, the R represents the resilience. Why do more and more people have a more difficult time to bounce back after life has thrown us a curve? Folks, here's the principle. Without learning how to regulate and rewire each other in a relational way, with the Twotrack theory, with the best of Christian thinking, and of course the best of the scientific thinking. Sound like the Karate Kid, don't I? Wax on and wax off. Without the best of both, like Congress, if Congress could only work together, then we can get these two tracks to work together, and that we can actually see people become more and more conformed to the image of Jesus Christ, to the image of the Trinity. And I think this is what 2 Peter means in chapter 1, where it uses the word theosis, that we can now participate, not partake. I think the English translation misses it there. We can actually participate in the divine nature. And folks, that's my prayer and hope for you, that we can all learn how to participate in this new relational term. Let's not be too busy driving down the interstate, talking amongst ourselves, listening to the good music, hitting the dashboard, when the turn on I-70 says turn right to make your exit, and we're too busy paying attention to other things, pursuing life, pursuing soccer games and matches, and doing all the things that we do as American people and people around the world. Let's not miss the turn, and the turn is the relational turn. And now, for the first time in history, no exaggeration, that there's more explosive information going on now today than ever. When my friend asked me on a text recently, "Do you know anything about the vagus nerve?" And I said, I know more about the vagus nerve than I care to. I know about the brain, I know about the body. And I said, I know about Vegas, but I don't know so much about Las Vegas. And my friend texted me back, a very smart theologian, and said, ha ha ha. Folks, the ha 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 has substance now. That real change is available if we're willing to start from the inside out and then work in terms of a relational paradigm. That's the relational term. In these upcoming videos, I want to share with you more specifics on medical, theological, biblical, scientific, neurological, and the whole host. I believe a two-track theory is necessary. We need training in both, and I will describe what that training looks like in the next video. Thank you so much for listening. Follow me on YouTube. Check out my post on WordPress, and if you're on Facebook, you'll see a lot of audio lectures there as well. Take care. Bye-bye.